Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got bad, mixed, and crazy martinis for you today on this Thursday. And Jim, let's start with the Biden speech. It was a little more than 10 minutes. He sounded horrible. And so if he hadn't already dropped out, there'd certainly be more people encouraging him to drop out. The weirdest part is he gave a 10-minute speech and never really explained why he was dropping out officially. We know why. The Democrats spent the last 3 weeks yelling at him to get out. But here's his explanation. He says he ran 4 years ago because he wanted to save democracy. Democracy still needs saving, so of course now he's leaving.
You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation.
So apparently he failed, Jim, at saving democracy. I think that's as close as he's going to say is they convinced me I'm going to lose. And so he's decided to go with Kamala. Two other clips. Actually, let's just comment on that real quick. What'd you make of him really sliding by any health concerns or admitting that, 3 weeks ago he was all gung-ho until everybody told him he had to go?
Yeah, we knew there were really three possible reasons for why Joe Biden shocked a lot of people after insisting that under no circumstances that only the Lord Almighty could convince him not to run, 1:45 on Sunday afternoon Eastern, he says, oh, by the way, I'm not running. And so option one is the polls, which were looking bad. They were looking not great before the debate, but were looking really bad. We saw all the relatively bluish swings, things that weren't really considered to be swing states, Virginia, New Hampshire, places like that looking shaky. Or it was age. And related to that, health. There'd been a lot of speculation that the COVID diagnosis had been a cover for something else that was more serious. I'd seen, rumors and claims that Biden had had a mini stroke. He didn't look good last night, but I don't think there was anything that pointed to me that he'd had a stroke recently or anything like that. That by Biden standards, that was par for the course. That was not significantly worse or better than his usual delivery. And the third option is both. And I think but the only reason we were watching was, well, how is he going to acknowledge this? Is he going to acknowledge one or the other or both? And the answer is he just didn't. He just kind of made that vague allusion to my party's not unified. Okay, but why? Why, Joe? Right. And he just chose not to talk about it. So as a result, you got about 9.5 minutes of very flowery language. And I don't begrudge the president saying, it has been my greatest honor to be your president, blah, blah, blah. But we know that's all coming. That's all boilerplate. That's. And I went back this morning, I wrote about this in today's Morning Jolt, and I went back and I read Lyndon Johnson's speech in 1968. And it was very clear. It was also like the Vietnam War was raging. And he said, look, America needs a president completely focused on his duties right now. I can't spend an hour or a day focusing on my own personal ambitions and, partisan efforts and campaign. Thus, I'm not. No, that seemed to call to the moment. That seemed to be more blunt. An acknowledgement, I can't do both. I can't do both well enough for the way they need to be done right now. Biden could have done that and did not. And in fact, I think, between the lines, it was, I think I deserved a second term. But Democrats were not united, meaning that Nancy Pelosi kept pushing a pillow on my face and making me try to stop me from breathing. And I took that as a signal. She did not want me to run for a second term.
And Lyndon Johnson was blowing smoke, too. His approval ratings were totally in the tank, and he was likely to lose, too. He was obviously trying to spin there. I think he was slightly less popular than smallpox at that point in 1968. So Biden did go for 10 minutes. Again, none of it explaining really why he's leaving, but he did try to gaslight us on his record a little bit.
Most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office.
I don't know what flowery language he's using to shoehorn that stat in there, but if it is true, it's because he waited 3.5 years to take executive action on the border. But overall, his record on the border is atrocious, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's admitting now that the Inflation Reduction Act was all about pushing a climate agenda. And the idea that violent crime is at a 50-year low when so many cities aren't even reporting their crime statistics, Jim, it's quite the spin.
It all amounts to, I am a phenomenal success, and the American people love me like no other president before. Also, my party will not unite behind me. What? Mr. President, these two things don't add up. If you really were as great as you think you were, people would be, okay, let's get 4 years of this guy. And I think that it is a further signifier of Biden and the powers of denial that he has to walk around saying, it's a shame I have to hang it up because I was such a phenomenal success and I was doing so well.
That's why your approval ratings have been in the high 30s and maybe low 40s on a good week for you ever since Afghanistan. And then there's this. He gave a shout out to Kamala, as you expected. And then he basically said, not directly, but he insinuated, if you don't vote for Kamala, our republic is going down.
When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands.
So there you go, Jim. No riling up the crazies with that.
You have no choice. You have only one person you can vote for. And that's what democracy is all about.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. So Biden showing why he shouldn't be president, but not admitting why he's not going to be president anymore.
You know what? Show, don't tell is what they always recommend. So I guess you could say, in a way, Biden did it.
Yes. No, they went out back for ice cream in the Rose Garden, so that's totally on brand. But Z-biotics. I don't even know how to tie this into what Biden just did, but if you care about the truth, you didn't get a lot of it in that speech, so you might have wanted to have a late-night beverage. But before you do anything like that, make sure you take Z-biotics. You'll feel much better than you otherwise would the next morning.
Z-biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next morning. Z-biotics produces an enzyme that breaks down this byproduct. Just remember to make Z-biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly as always, and then you'll feel your best the next morning.
The coworker that I've talked about so many times definitely says he felt better after taking Z-biotics. Didn't feel it all the next morning, in fact. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our mixed martini, and that is another big speech that happened in Washington yesterday, and that was to a joint session of Congress. A lot of boycotts, especially from the Democratic side of the aisle, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in town. So the speech, for the most part, is the good part of this mixed martini. It's the insane radical protesters not far away at Union Station. That's the bad part of it. And so Netanyahu talking about a lot of different things, mainly about the war, how he says, you know, our interests are at stake and so are yours, United States. Thank you for the help that you've provided with Iron Dome and so forth. And then he says this is his vision for Gaza once Hamas is defeated.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there to prevent the resurgence of terror, to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. That's not too much to ask. It's a fundamental thing that we have a right to demand and to receive. A new generation of Palestinians must no longer be taught to hate Jews, but rather to live in peace with us.
Now, just a couple of blocks away at Union Station, which if you've been to D.C., you know is very, very close to Capitol Hill, there was fencing around the Capitol, which is why these crazies were at Union Station. They were defacing the Columbus statue. They were defacing the Freedom Bell. I don't think Netanyahu knew that at the moment, but he's certainly seen the protests throughout our country, college campuses, major protests outside the White House not that long ago where statues and other things were defaced. And he says, these protesters, they got a lot of passion, but they're not too bright.
Right now, outside this building, not that many, but they're there, and throughout the city. Well, I have a message for these protesters. When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. Some of these protesters hold up signs proclaiming gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC.
Nancy Pelosi, who boycotted the speech, Kamala Harris wasn't there to preside over the session either, but Pelosi says Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation in the House chamber today was by far the worst presentation of any foreign dignitary invited and honored with the privilege of addressing the Congress of the United States. Many of us who love Israel spent time today listening to Israeli citizens whose families have suffered in the wake of the October 7th Hamas terror attacks and kidnappings. These families are asking for a ceasefire deal that will bring the hostages home. I'm pretty sure the prime minister wants hostages to come home too, but he also doesn't want to let Hamas off the hook. My favorite, though, was Chris Murphy yesterday at 3:38 p.m. saying the suggestion that any American who objects to the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is a Hamas sympathizer was way out of bounds. Then, at 9:14 p.m. last night, Chris Murphy says, I've seen some disturbing images coming out of today's protests at the Capitol. I'll always support Americans exercising their First Amendment rights, but pro-Hamas cheers and messages of hate and anti-Semitism have no place in our country, period. And today, Vice President Harris issued a statement that pretty much hit all the right notes. It's weird that it came a day late, but certainly better late than never. She denounced everything the protesters were doing, from burning an American flag, too, in addition to all the defacing that they did, and says she supports the right to peacefully protest, but not what we saw yesterday. So, Jim, obviously a tale of two different stories here with the speech and the radicals out there. What struck you most?
I hate to use one of my cliches, Greg, but there is a lot to unpack here. First, I kind of go in reverse order. I'm glad Vice President Harris put out that statement. I think it was by what we've come to expect from Democrats. That was a pretty forceful statement. I noticed the reference to flag burning. I'm glad she said it. I'd like to see her. I prefer. Good to see this on camera. If I were her, I'd get in front of a camera and I would pound that podium and I would say, "How dare you? Hamas. Cheering Hamas has no place in America. Hamas is an enemy of America, and if you're cheering for them, you've chosen your side. Really rip into this." But this was a pretty darn forceful statement. I'd say this is the bad part of this good martini is that this morning my editor at the Post said, "Hey, do you want to write something on Harris not denouncing the flag burning protesters at Union Station?" And I'd gotten a good start on that, and then she did it. Darn it! No, I'm very glad the vice president did that, but. The news cycle moves faster than I can type, apparently. Just an observation about the Democrats complaining about Netanyahu not releasing the hostages. I went back and I looked it up, and I mentioned this in yesterday's Jolt. Every month since last fall, there has been an offer on the table to Hamas, and Hamas has walked away from the table or projected a ceasefire deal, hostage for prisoners trade. There has been no shortages of offerings, and 9 times out of 10, it is Hamas that's saying, no, we want more. We're holding out for more. They're not even willing to say how many hostages they have. They're not even willing to say which hostages are alive or dead. Hamas is the ultimate bad faith negotiator. They're the ultimate bad faith actor. And I really think you're stretching it if you say, oh, it's Netanyahu's fault. He hasn't gotten all these folks. Because when they've had the opportunity to do it by force, they've done it by force. So don't, it is a nonsense BS. There are fair complaints about Bibi Netanyahu. That is not one of them. And if I were Pelosi, I'd be embarrassed to be rolling out that supremely implausible spin. And then just finally on Netanyahu, he's addressed Congress. I believe this is the 4th time. I think he's now set a record for the most times a foreign leader has addressed Congress. Obviously, he's been in power for a long time. Going back all the way to the 1990s, there's been some interruptions of other Israeli prime ministers. My sense, though, is that Bibi always brings it. And you want to talk, there's a lot of political figures out there who'd like to be considered great orators, great speech givers. Sometimes good speech writing helps, no getting around it. Zingers like, gays for Gaza is like chickens for KFC. That's good too. But I think in the end, it would be very hard to give a important national address and really get people fired up about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, even though it's an important issue. Crypto, microaggression. Like sometimes the topic just doesn't grab people. Bibi Netanyahu is talking about the survival of the Jewish state. He is talking about people who want to perpetuate a second Holocaust. The stakes really don't get much bigger than that. And so I think, yes, he is a great, deliverer of those speech. He is, I'm sure the writers went over that to perfect. But I'm going to say this, he did not use teleprompter. He did it off notes. But he is, I think in the end, when you're talking about big things, it lends that gravitas. It lends to that, and it helps you rise to the occasion. And that's what made it not just another speech by another foreign leader. There's a reason he keeps getting invited back. And if Democrat, I think if you were a pro-Israel Democrat, you were feeling pretty good yesterday. If you were an anti-Israel Democrat, I think you were very sweating like a whore in church. You are just not in a spot where you would want to be, because Netanyahu was laying out the case for Israel. And this argument of like, well, I'm anti-Zionist, but I'm not anti-Semitic. The flag-burning yahoos up at Union Station made very clear they're for everybody who says they're anti-Zionist, that anti-Semitism is just below the surface, and it's just waiting to come out like a popping pimple. It's just right there, ready to explode on you. So that's exactly the graphic image I'm sure every listener wanted to, when they started this podcast. But that's where my mind goes when I'm ad-libbing. But again,
Exactly.
just a sign of, Netanyahu. Look, it's Israel and Gaza and Hamas are in the news. It seems like every week, every 2 weeks. It's not front and center the way it is. Obviously, Trump getting shot. That's a big deal. Biden stepping down. That's a big deal. But for Israel, this hasn't stopped. For this is the threat to them has not gone away. So it was a good reminder, and I think I think Bibi absolutely made the most of his opportunity before Congress yesterday.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple different notes here. I listened to a radio report on the way home from work last night about the protests at Union Station. And the reporter's like, yes, they defaced all these things. They burned the American flag. There were signs of end Israel. And something about hatred towards America. And then the final line was, so obviously they're still pushing for a ceasefire, as if that's the official position. And
they're setting things on fire. How about we cease setting the flag on fire? How about that? So
exactly. And you mentioned
it was mostly peaceful. It was mostly peaceful arson, Greg.
The media. We're going to talk about them a lot in Third Martini,
let's stick to incendiary language, not incendiary materials, okay?
You mentioned how long Netanyahu's been around, and he's certainly been front and center really for the past 15 years. Most of the 2000s, it was Ariel Sharon and a few other people, but he was first prime minister in the 90s. And so to give you an idea of how long ago that is, when he first came into office, there was this joke of, if Netscape merged with Yahoo, it would be Netanyahu. And if you don't know what Netscape is, young people, don't bother. It's an old search engine, and it's long gone.
Greg, I can do you one better. If I remember correctly, that Netanyahu's first visit to meet with a president was a president by the name of Bill Clinton. And just as, Netanyahu arrives, and right before his arrival, Biden announces he's not running, like at this giant, tumultuous news event. I believe the first time he did this to meet Bill Clinton, the Lewinsky scandal broke. So every time Netanyahu comes to town, it's generally bad news for some Democrat.
Well, great news when it comes to taking care of your health, and especially your metabolic health. And that's because Lumen makes it as easy as breathing. You wake up in the morning, you take your Lumen, you breathe into it, and it tells you exactly what's happening. Are you burning fat? Are you burning carbs? What else is going on? What should you eat that day to balance things out? It gives you suggestions on that, and workout, sleep, and even stress management.
Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a whole bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, you name it. Lumen gives you recommendations that can improve your metabolic health.
Lumen gives you the advice you need to get yourself healthier, and it could not be easier. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/3ml to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/3ml for 15% off your purchase. Again, that's lumen.me/3ml. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Weird how no one's going after CrowdStrike after their transportation meltdown. The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. While Pete goes after airlines like Delta, no one's saying a word about CrowdStrike. Remember when CrowdStrike also said Hillary's server was hacked by Russians? Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, we talked about this a little bit in passing yesterday with Axios suggesting that Kamala Harris was never really the border czar. That's not true. And people were pointing out stories that Axios had written as early as 2021 when Biden named Harris to really be the point person on stopping the flow of lots of people to our border. And so instead of just admitting that that's the position she had and she hasn't done a good job on it, editor's note. This is from the article in 2021. This article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar back in 2021. Meanwhile, right around the time that Harris was running for president in 2020, she was labeled by GovTrack as the most liberal United States senator. They've now updated theirs, saying on July 23rd, 2024, this article was updated. The text, especially given our ranking her as the most left-leaning senator in 2019 based on co-sponsorship. But looking at the legislation she's introduced tells a different story. Judge for yourself was removed. Once the 2019-2020 session of Congress was complete, the statistics for the entire session and for Harris's entire tenure in the Senate showed a different story. They just never bothered to update it, Jim, until a couple days after she became the presumptive Democratic nominee. But those aren't the only ones trying to clean up the mess, and because they realize that the border is a major liability for Biden, and they're trying to make it not one for her, but I don't think they can outrun it. There's a montage of media before and after Kamala Harris became the nominee. This is only a portion of it. And so listen to the hypocrisy here.
Quote unquote border czar. Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
All right, well, let's go back to 2021 when this all happened. Here's Biden explaining her job. He didn't use the term border czar, but it's pretty clear what he meant.
I've asked her, the VP, today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks stemming the migration to our southern border.
So, Jim, she was just in charge of reducing the number of people surging to the border. And so over the past 4 years, obviously, that's a smashing success. What do you make of the effort? I've seen people refer to Men in Black with the flashy thing, and your memory's supposed to go away and not remember what happened in the last 4 years.
Greg, every single one of those media, I'm a professional fact checker reports always sounds like, you know, Greg, we've looked into this, and it turns out that Tsar is a title historically used by Slavic monarchs. It's derived from the Latin word Caesar, which was intended to mean emperor in the European medieval sense of the term, not in the American context. And what's more, Tsar and its variants were official titles in the First Bulgarian Empire, running from 681 to the year 1018. Kamala Harris was not there and therefore cannot be accurately labeled a czar. No kidding, right? It was always shorthand. We've had a cyber czar, we had a drug czar. This, nobody is saying she had a little crown and a little scepter and had a throne in Moscow. Okay, nobody. I'm sorry, actually, I forgot. Actually, Bibi was in Kyiv. That's why Putin's trying to get the place. But anyway, that we all okay, no, we get it. It was always shorthand. It was always a nickname for that position. But if you want to, a fairer argument would be she wasn't the border czar, she was the migration czar, right? She was supposed to be talking to these Central American countries and try to get them to do more to stop these waves of migrants coming up towards the border. But it's still dealing with illegal immigration. It is not like you could say, she had nothing to do with the border. No, her point was to try to do this. And she did make one trip to the border, and then one trip to these Central American countries. Remember, she looked at the camera and said, "Don't come." And no one believed her. No one regarded, no one took her seriously. No one thought the Biden administration remembered. Now, by the way, I periodically like to take off my independent conservative hat and put on all right, if I were a Democrat, what would I be recommending type hat? And they would be so this is silly. This is ridiculous we have the audio. We have Biden. Biden said there was nobody better experienced or better positioned for this type of work. I think there was, but anyway. But she'd be better. If I were Harris, I'd go out there and say, look, I was never given the authority I was needed to have. There were too many people in this administration who dragged their feet on this. There are too many people in this administration who did not believe there was a priority on this. I'm going to make this a priority, and when I'm in charge, that border is going to look real different. Now, we can argue about whether people would actually believe her on that. But throw Mayorkas under the bus. He's not going to be in your administration anyway. Throw everybody else on Biden's staff under the bus. They didn't trust you with this job anyway, right? They're all gone now. They're off for sight. They're in the rearview mirror. You got to position yourself, and that would be a better move than saying, "Oh, I was never really the border czar." Come on, that's like the other things also the degree to which the mainstream media can say, "Well, there is no official title border czar." Gotcha, conservatives. Bingo, in your face. And they think that's actually winning the argument as opposed to, well, no, but Biden put her in charge of this very important component of securing the border and stopping waves of illegal immigrants coming up across the Rio Grande. And they're like, oh, no, it didn't work. It's not just that they missed the point, Greg. It's that they do it by light years.
And intentionally missing the point.
Yeah, it's very hard to believe this is, They
Crazy.
can't be that dumb.
Quick exit, hopefully quick. The last remaining prominent holdout, according to NBC News, Barack Obama is very close to officially endorsing Kamala Harris. But if you read the New York Post, he's furious that Joe Biden quickly endorsed her, and so he actually wanted Mark Kelly to be the candidate instead of Kamala Harris because he doesn't think she can win. So maybe he's holding out to see if Kamala will put Kelly on the ticket or what have you. But it's kind of funny. Barack Obama doesn't get shown up by somebody of Biden's mental caliber very often, so it's kind of funny to see if this is actually what happened.
Yeah, look, we talked in previous podcasts about the relationship between Biden and Obama being way more complicated than the happy, shiny, happy people holding hands, storyline. And so I know there's always been a rivalry, and I'm sure when people started saying Biden's gotten more done in 3 years than Obama did in 8, that didn't sit well out in Chicago, or I should say actually up in Colorado and still in D.C. So I think there's that. There's a question of how much does Obama really want to see Biden succeed. But it's also, you're right, we've never gotten this warm vibe between Obama and Harris. I've heard some people theorize that there's 3 different power bases within the Democratic Party. And one of them's out in California, and Harris is kind of affiliated with that. One of them is Chicago and the Obamaites. And the other argument is New York, but there's not a particular figure who's associated with it right now. It's interesting. It's conceivable. I do know that this way, if Democrats had said, we're totally scrapping Biden and Harris, and we're nominating 2 new people for our ticket 4 months before Election Day, that would be an admission that they failed. Not just that Biden was old, but that Harris never should have been there. So they almost have to go with Harris. And the other thing, which is very strange, and obviously you're seeing Democratic Veep stakes get really intense right now. Kelly's not a bad pick, but Greg, you and I do a podcast 5 days a week. How many times have we mentioned Mark Kelly on this podcast? A handful?
Very few, except when he's up for re-election, and all he has to say is, hey, remember I was an astronaut.
Yeah, by the way, 40 combat missions. He's, Gabby Gifford's husband. There's a cool life story to be told there.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not like you could say, oh, he's a leader of Democrats in the Senate, or he really stands out, or nobody says, oh my God, did you see what Mark Kelly said last night? Right? He's just kind of there. He's a background character. He's an NPC. And the idea that this guy, if you pick him, if Harris picks him, maybe you win Arizona, and that helps. I just think there are a bunch of other ones that look better. And it's not like I can say I'm pro Shapiro, but one, I think picking Shapiro would be a nice little signal to everybody who's burning those flags You can't intimidate us. You're not going to keep a Jew off the ticket because you're, by intimidating us. 2, this guy is, probably locks up Pennsylvania, probably, and he's Mr. Suburbs. So, like, if you're the Trump campaign, you don't want them picking Shapiro. And so you're probably hoping for, like, Buttigieg or something like that. But Buttigieg would probably miss the flight. One closing thought, the argument from Harris and the Democrats is that voting for Trump is fascism, that it's just like voting for somebody like Mussolini. And the difference between Mussolini and, say, Pete Buttigieg is that Mussolini made the trains run on time.
Not sure that's the ad they want to cut. So we'll leave it there for today. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Please tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. They really do make a huge difference. So please, if you have a couple minutes, leave us a great review. Also, get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Thursday and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.